Okay, so welcome back. One of the things I wanted to do, it hit me last night as I was looking up this article from the Philadelphia Inquirer from September 20th, 1881, talking about the death of President Garfield. I figured I wanted to do a video, at least a series of videos looking up what the newspapers of the day said about a certain article. As you know, I'm into genealogy, and one of the things that is really interesting, one of the websites I subscribe to is a thing called newspapers.com, and it allows you to be able to read the actual newspaper of certain dates in history. So, right now, in the meantime, as I'm doing exercise and everything, I'm listening to audiobooks. Been hooked on Audible for a long time. Anyway, I'm listening to a book basically about President Garfield and what led up to his assassination and the guy who ended up killing him. And Garfield didn't die right away. If I remember correctly, he was shot in July 1881, and ended up dying a few months later, mostly through an incompetent doctor who, if he had been up to date with the medical skills, probably could have saved Garfield. But anyway, but let's take this article. Like I said, this is a PDF download from newspapers.com, and it begins by, we'll look at it like this. So, President Garfield dead. He passes away at a few minutes before 11 o'clock last night. The change very sudden at the last. He gives a sketch of his career, 50 years of an eventful life, 20 years in the service of his country, soldier, statesman, and Christian. Meeting of the cabinet, reception of the news, midnight scenes in Philadelphia, councils to be convened today, and a request made that it remains be brought here. So this is coming from the Inquirer, a special dispatch from Eberton, New Jersey. The president is dead. At 10 o'clock, he was sleeping quietly, and fears for another chill tonight had passed away. But a few minutes later, the watchers noticed a sudden change, and the physicians were suddenly summoned. They at once said that his death had every prospect of passing an easy and comfortable night, and dropped into a sound slumber. Suddenly, he awakened and complained of a terrible pain in his heart. The physicians were summoned, but he died in a few minutes. Attorney General McVeigh shed tears while giving a detailed statement of the death scene. History of the day. Oh, that's a word I don't use very often. The furbow. Huh. Well, the article is over 100, almost 140 years. So the rise that occurred after the rigorous eat. Okay, some of these are not that clear. Let's see what that word is trying to say. Your guess is as mine. So last evening passed away, and he slept well and was evidently much refreshed by his rest. While the physicians were making their usual examination and dressing the wound at 8:30 this morning, the president was attacked by a severe rigor. That's probably what the word was. It lasted about 20 minutes, and the physicians were compelled to suspend the dressing of the wound. The rigor was followed by a febrile, that's another word don't use very often. Yep, there it is. Febrile rise, during which the pulse ran up to over 116. The patient suffered also from profuse sweats. At noon, his pulse had lowered to 104. The rigor caused intense excitement, coming as it did so after the others, and the president did not rally as soon as was expected. The physicians were much alarmed. Even Dr. Bliss, who has had a bright side to present to the reporters every day since the shooting of the president, was almost unmanned. He hardly knew what to say when questioned by the representatives of the Inquirer, and he seemed to be without a single ray of hope. At last he said, "Yes, the case is decidedly bad, and the president is very near death's door." Attorney General McVeigh felt very despondent and could not see how the president could possibly pull through the crisis and regain strength and health. During the day, the president took considerable nourishment, but he had sunk so low as to be unable to relish the food administered to him by the attending physicians and swallowed it in a purely mechanical way. The examination made this evening showed that the area of dullness in the lung was smaller than it was yesterday. The pulse was more robust. Bleh. Dr. Bliss stated, robust. Third time's the charm. Dr. Bliss stated that there was a slightly better expression of the symptoms and that the president coughed less and easier. He did not believe that there was pus collections of any considerable size in the lungs. If the pus had formed there, he thought it would most probably be in the shape of small points, which would break like a ripe boil. With the exception of this morning's rigor, said the doctor, the president passed an even and somewhat comfortable day. The pulse, temperature, and respiration were low when the evening examination was made. We'll go back up to the top. Sad scene in Franklin College, the president's last moment. The president died at 10:35. Mr. Warren Young, assistant to Private Secretary Brown, brought the news from the cottage at 10 minutes before 11 o'clock. The first indications that anything serious had occurred was the appearance of the messenger at Elbron Hotel, who obtained a carriage and drove rapidly off. It is supposed he had gone to summon the members of the cabinet, who left here about 9:30 tonight. Attorney General McVeigh, shortly after 11 p.m., came to the Elbron Hotel from the Franklin Cottage and made the following statement. I sent my dispatch to Minister Lowe at 10 p.m. Shortly before that, Dr. Bliss had seen the president and found his pulse at 106 beats per minute, and all the conditions were then promising a quiet night. The doctor asked the president if he was feeling uncomfortable in any way. The president answered not at all, and shortly afterwards fell asleep, and Dr. Bliss returned to his room across the hall from that occupied by the president. Colonels Swaim and Rockwell remained with the president. About 15 minutes after 10, the president awakened and remarked to Colonel Swaim that he was suffering great pain and placed his hand over his heart. Dr. Bliss was summoned, and when he entered the room, he found the president substantially without pulse, and the action of the heart was almost indistinguishable. He said at once that the president was dying and directed that Mrs. Garfield be called and also the doctors. The president remained in the dying condition until 10:35 when he was pronounced dead. He died of some trouble of the heart, supposed to be neuralgia. That's the word I don't use. But that, of course, is uncertain. I notified General Arthur and sent a dispatch to Messrs. Blaine and Lincoln, who are en route from Boston to New York. The cabinet now at 11:30 p.m. are in consultation. Too many syllables. Last official bulletin, 1:15 a.m. The official bulletin has just been issued. The president died at 10:35 p.m. After the bulletin was issued at 5:30 this evening, the president continued in much the same condition as during the afternoon, with the pulse varying from 102 to 106, with rather increased force and volume. After taking nourishment, he fell into a quiet sleep about 35 minutes before his death, and while asleep, his pulse rose to 120 and was somewhat more feeble. At 10 minutes after 10 o'clock, he awoke, complained of severe pain over the region of the heart, and almost immediately became unconscious. and ceased to breathe at 10:35. So at midnight, a meeting in Franklin College. 11:15, the cabinet had just arrived and gone in a body to the Franklin cottage. All are here except Blaine and Lincoln. Interesting to note that's President Lincoln's son. Attorney General McVeigh had telegraphed the latter two, who are now en route to Long Beach, of the president's death. The guard around the cottage has been doubled, and no one is allowed to approach it. The government has taken possession of the only telegraph wire which is connected in Elbron. President Arthur summoned. Attorney General McVeigh had just sent the following to Vice President Arthur. It becomes our painful duty to inform you of the death of President Garfield and to advise you to take the oath of office as President of the United States without delay. If it concurs with your judgment, we'll be very glad if you come here on the earliest train tomorrow morning. That was signed by William Windom, Secretary of the Treasury, and as you can see, other people. Let's see, still in session. The cabinet at this hour at 1 a.m. is still in session at the cottage. Let's see. Yesterday's record. Bulletins from the President's Cottage, Albertson, New Jersey, September 19th. The surgeons in charge of the President today issued the following bulletins. It would appear that they did not anticipate so sudden a termination of their patient's life. 9 a.m., the condition of the President this morning continues unfavorable. Shortly after the issue of the evening bulletin, he had a chill lasting 15 minutes. The febrile rise following continued until 12 o'clock midnight, during which the pulse ranged from 112 to 130. The sweating that followed was quite profuse. The cough, which was troublesome during the chill, gave him but little annoyance the remainder of the night. This morning at 8 o'clock, the temperature was 98.8, pulse 106, and respiration 22. At 8:30 a.m., the chill came on account of which the dressing was temporarily postponed. 1 p.m., the chill from which the President was suffering at the time morning bulletin was issued, lasted about 15 minutes, and we'll go back up to the top. It was followed by a febrile rise of temperature and was sweating. He has slept most of the time, but his general condition has not materially changed since. Temperature 198.2, pulse 104, respiration 20. 6 p.m., though the gravity of the President's condition continues, there has been no aggravation of symptoms since the noon bulletin was issued. He has slept most of the time, coughing but little and with ease. The spata remains unchanged. A significant amount of nourishment has been taken and retained. Temperature 98.4, pulse 102, respiration 18. So little was immediate danger feared at 10 o'clock tonight that the following was sent to Minister Lowell by Attorney General McVeigh. The President had another chill of considerable severity this morning, which, following so soon after the chill of last evening, left him very weak indeed. His pulse became more frequent and feeble than at any time since he recovered from the immediate shock of the wound, and his general condition was more alarming during the day. His system has reached to some extent, and he passed the afternoon and evening comfortably. At this hour, he is resting quietly, and no disturbance is expected during the night. There has been no gain whatever in strength, and there is therefore no decrease in anxiety. Let's see. Dr. Bliss this morning dictated the following diagnosis of the President's case. After he was wounded to the inflamed diaphragm perforated by the bullet, the inflammation being aggravated by the nearness to the fractured rib. This congestion increased in intensity, though not in area, owing to the long continued recumbent position of the patient. There was no difficulty in breathing and no cough at that time, not until the pituitary, that's a different word, trouble. When the latter became aggravated, the pus from the gland found its way into the mouth, and the coughing efforts to throw it off being difficult and continuous, induced an inflammation of the mucous membrane of the mouth. The pus continuing to cause this cough, the inflammation extended to the throat, then to the larynx, thence to the bronchial tubes downward. This inflammation naturally extended to the right lung because the patient nearly all the time lay on that side, and when it reached the neighborhood of the afflicted lung, it became naturally aggravated during all this time. The septic condition of the blood was doing its work, and when the lung and bronchial affections at last met, they found a deranged and enfeebled system at a very low grade. Still, the blood lesions were all repairing at this time. The conjunction of the two inflammations gave the best opportunity for the dissemination of the combined activities of each, and there was a spreading of the united troubles. The healings of the lesions was stopped at about this time, and the repairing process was arrested. We do not know yet if the result has been a deposit of pus in the lungs. If any pus is now in the right lung, it is not indicated, and the deposit must have occurred within the past 3 or 4 days. The amount would be extremely small. If there was not in nutrition, the patient would be able to resist the operation of all these causes. But there is in nutrition, the healing process is stopped. The blood cannot furnish the constitutes of repairs, and there is nothing to build on, nor even support what vitality is still left, and that is being continually drawn on and diminished. The president's hold on life. Dr. Bliss this noon, when asked in regard to the president's challenges, said the history of the case is much against him, but when you go in that room and look at him and see the firm expression of his face and note the wonderful self-reliance he shows, you cannot, even bearing all the terrible facts of his condition in view, but think that he has still a chance and may pull through. And there is another thing that makes me turn away from him and often leave the room. He knows it all. You cannot tell him anything. There he is. He does not flinch. He is just looking death straight in the face. He does not mean to die, and death has got to kill him before he will be any deader than he is now. Look here, just think for the moment, look back over this case, and recall all that has occurred. Remember all that he has faced and fought down. Think how, after renewed hope at each victory, he has invariably, before having time to regain any strength for another fight, has been confronted by some fresh enemy, and met every battle without a murmur at the awful troubles set upon him. He has not done all this for himself. If there had been no other than a mere personal interest, even he would have gone down long ago. But it has been the people. The people. Let me have a chance to perform my trust, which has been his plea. Why should a good man like that die in this way? Why should he have had such a long battle forced upon him, only to be allowed to go down now, when we at last know how well it would be for all of us if he should live? Can you see anything right about that? I cannot yet believe it is going to come. The president called for a hand glass and looked carefully in it for a long time, examining his face, neck, and head. He then put it away and, turning to the surgeon, said, I cannot see why I should be so weak, as you assure me I am, when I look so well and feel so well. I suffer no pain. Dr. Bliss turned away and said to Dr. Agnew, perhaps he don't feel pain because he is so weak. Yes, replied Dr. Agnew, that may be. General Sherman, a letter in the interest of law and order. The following letter from General Sherman in the interest of law and order in dealing with the assassin Guteau will appear in tomorrow's Republican. Washington, D.C., September 19th, 1881, 3 p.m. Honorable George C. Gorham, National Republican. Dear Sir, you and I have been comrades in civil broils and strife in California when vigilance committees assumed rule, and we know, or how I think we know, how good, honest people have done some acts of violence under an honest conviction that they were doing the right thing, and we believe that in the time of the great physician will cure all things to the patient. I have occasionally and recently heard the same arguments on the streets, the same scraps of wisdom enunciated. And now, at this dread hour, when our noble, brave president, is lying in the very agonies of death at Long Branch, and the cowardly, miserable wretch Guteau is cowering in his cell at the public jail, it occurs to me that you and I should, in our respective spheres, make profitable use of our past experience. No man on earth holds in higher esteem the noble qualities of James A. Garfield than myself. I was on the point of departing for Chattanooga tonight to do the honor to the heroes of Chickamauga, of whom he was one of the most prominent, but was stayed by the unfavorable report from his bedside at noon, and I shall remain here at my post of duty till the last moments of hope. At Chickamauga, hope I pronounced that right, I probably didn't, 18 years ago, Garfield was chief of staff to General Rosecrans, whose right wing was broken back by the vehement charges of Bragg's force and was carried along with the broken masses into Chattanooga, when he begged for the privilege of returning to join General George H. Thomas, whose guns told him that the heroic man still stood fast with his left wing. General Rosecrans gave him leave, and he did return, running the gauntlet, joining General Thomas and serving close to his person till night, enabled them to fall back in good order to Chattanooga. That was General Garfield's last fight, in which he felt a special pride. I know that he intended to be at Chattanooga next Wednesday to celebrate the event, but it is ordered otherwise, for now he lies by the seashore on his deathbed from a wound inflicted by the miserable wretch Guteau. For this man Guteau, I ask no soldier, no citizen to feel one particle of sympathy. On the contrary, could I make my will the law, shooting or hanging would be too good for him. I do ask every soldier and every citizen to remember that we profess to be the most loyal nation on earth to the sacred promises of the law. There is no merit in obeying an agreeable law, but there is glory in heroism and submitting gracefully to an oppressive one. Our Constitution reads, no person shall be held to answer for a capital or otherwise infamous crime unless on a presentment or indictment of a grand jury, and in all criminal prosecutions, the accursed shall enjoy the right to a speedy and public trial by an impartial jury of the state and district wherein the crime shall have been committed. This is the solemn contract of government bending on the conscience of all. Should our president die by the murderer, should our president die, the murderer is entitled to a speedy trial by a jury, and I hope will have justice done to him. But it is not my office or yours or anybody except the regular courts of this district, which are in undisputed power. Violence in any form will bring reproach upon us all, upon the country at large, and especially on us of the District of Columbia. All the circumstances of the shooting, of the long heroic struggle for life, impressed me so strongly that I would be ashamed of my countrymen if they mingled with their feelings of grief any thoughts of vengeance. Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. I trust that the public press will order its powerful influence to maintain the good order and decorum which have prevailed since the saddest of all days in Washington, July 2nd, 1881. Sincerely, your friend, W.T. Sherman. Let's see. We'll do a little bit more. Reception of the news of the president's death, although it was not unexpected, had a depressing effect on the citizens who learned of the news tonight. Crowds of people had surrounded the bulletin boards at the different newspaper offices in the course of the evening and waited patiently for any cheering news of the president's condition. But the posters conveyed no hope, and when the bulletins were put up announcing that the president was dead, genuine expression of regret and sorrow were heard on all sides. The news spread with lightning-like rapidity throughout the city and is the universal topic of conversation. The bells of the churches of Trinity Parish were tolled at short intervals for an hour in memory of the departed president. One afternoon paper issued an extra shortly after the news was received, the copies of which were eagerly purchased at any price. In Washington, there was more excitement and greater solicitude in the city today regarding the president's condition than there has been since he was removed from Washington. Little or no hope existed in the public mind for the recovery of the president. Even those persons who had heretofore maintained a blind faith in a happy issue of this national sorrow abandoned all hope. There was a settled gloom over the whole. All personal interests were forgotten, and business was almost at a standstill while the community waited for the sad tidings which were regarded as inevitable. As the day wore on, the excitement, which was in itself subdued, increased, and the crowds began to grow larger around the posted bulletins. The general impression was that the end would come soon, so that when the intelligence of his death was received tonight at 45 minutes after 10 o'clock, it created little surprise, but every heart that hears of it tonight is grieved, and the deep feeling of sadness is not confined to personal or political friends of the dead president, but is universal. And I think we'll finish up with this one coming up because we're not going to really read the biography of the president. But anyway, last part of the newspaper article, the front page, was in the city, and this would be in Philadelphia, receiving the sad tidings what the mayor will do. The president is dead was a solemn announcement that was bulletined in the front of the Inquirer office a few minutes after 11 o'clock last night. For a short time, the news was received only by comparatively few, but in a half hour or so it had spread like wildfire, and the streets in front of the newspaper and telegraph offices were crowded. As at Broad and Chestnut Streets, the crowd was so great as to stop the progress of the Chestnut Street cars. Crowds coming from the various theaters added to the throngs already assembled, and by midnight, Chestnut Street from Broad to Third was a continuous scene of excitement. The crowds were not boisterous, but anxious. On all sides were heard expressions of sorrow and regret, and everybody spoke as if he had lost in the death of the president a dear personal friend. A reporter of the Inquirer called upon Mayor King at midnight at his residence, numbered 2018 Arch Street. He had just been informed of the death of the president by a 20th district officer. He expressed great sorrow at the news and stated that he would issue a call today, conveying both branches of the councils to take action upon the president's death and to call upon the people to bear the great affliction with fortitude and place their reliance on God, who doth all things well. Mayor King also said that a request would be made to permit the body of President Garfield to lie in state in Independence Hall, where the remains of the martyred Lincoln had similarly reposed. Upon his arrival at the office this morning, Mayor King will immediately summon the presidents of both council chambers in order to have councils convene as soon as possible. Many expressed the opinion last night that the state house bell should be tolled, but that but the man in charge would not toll the bell without orders from someone in authority. Mayor King was opposed to such a course unless it might be to toll it at intervals during the funeral of the president or during the time the latter's remains may be lying in state in this city. If the request to allow them to remain for a time in Independence Hall should be granted. At the Baltimore Depot, Broad Street, and Washington Avenue, the announcement of the death of President Garfield was posted at the telegraph office and quickly attracted a large crowd. An incident worthy of note occurred in the Union Line car. A gentleman who had read the announcement at the depot got on the car and asked the conductor if he had heard the news. The conductor replied that he had not, and the gentleman informed him of the president's death. The conversation was carried on in a tone sufficiently loud for the passengers to overhear, and among them were two ladies, both of whom were affected to tears. On the authority of a leading politician with whom an Inquirer reporter had a talk at midnight, it may be said that the Republican primary elections and the nominating convention will be postponed, if possible, until after the funeral of the president. He added that this is not official, of course, but if the city committee can see its way clear to follow that course, it will do so today. None of the theaters or other amusement resorts will be open tonight, and business generally will be partially suspended today and will be at more or less at a standstill until after the funeral. This evening, the 100th anniversary of the formation of the German Society will be celebrated by a banquet at St. George's Hall. A meeting of the committee having the matter in charge was held last night, and there was considerable discussion as to whether the celebration of the anniversary should be postponed in case of the president's death. It was decided, however, that it would be impossible to postpone this banquet as all the arrangements had been made. It was determined to dispense with music and speeches, and remarks only would be made relative to the death of the president in case that sad event occurred. As it has now taken place, this will be the program. Immediately upon the receipt of the news, the Inquirer issued an extra 4 pages, giving special telegrams announcing the death of the president, together with an extended obituary notice and an editorial on the sad event. In 30 minutes after the receipt of the morning intelligence, the paper was in the hands of newsboys on the street. Although the edition was a large one, it was quickly disposed of, copies being sold all over the city. So we're going to skip the biography of President Garfield, but that is the front page of the Philadelphia Inquirer from the Tuesday, September 20th, 1881, the first year of President Garfield's presidency. Anyway, I hope you have enjoyed this video. Kind of reading it's a little bit harder. It's not like a lectionary where, it's broken up. But anyway, let me know if you're interested in any topics, if you want me to do any research on topics, and I'll see what I can do. So until next time, take care and God bless.